outside. A corpse. Human. The pod maintained a low internal temperature the whole time. Very little outside air got in. That would have slowed down decomposition. Still, the remains were mostly skeletal. Estimated time of death is between 6 months and a year ago. We put the screws to Huey about it. Listen to the tape. Turns out it was the body of someone we knew very well.
Boss, research materials have been stolen from Code Talker's mansion. The materials were packed into 2 containers and hidden in the jungle southwest of the mansion. You have to recover those containers. The pickup crew coming for those documents is none other than XOF. That's right. They're still active, even after Skullface's death. Now that he's no longer in charge, their original chain of command has been restored. Meaning if XOF gets those documents, Code Talker's research ends up in Cypher's hands. According to Code Talker, the research papers stored in that mansion account for over 50 years of study. The problem is the vocal cord parasites. If the papers documenting that research fall into Cypher's hands, they'll take another long, hard look at them. The ethnic cleansers we thought were history will become a reality. America, Zero, will have a weapon far more powerful than any nuke. Even worse, if this knowledge were to leak, the world, humanity, can't be entrusted with this kind of power. Recover the containers before the enemy extraction choppers arrive.
The research materials have been packed into 2 containers and hidden in the jungle southwest of the mansion. Enemy extraction choppers will be there any minute. You have to find and retrieve those containers before they arrive. That area is being guarded by zero-risk security, and their client is XOF. If the choppers make off with the containers, that research will end up in Cypher's hands. That cannot be allowed to happen. One other thing, boss. We need a cargo-capable Fulton extraction device to recover the containers. Boss, looks like they're stepping up security around the targets. Watch yourself.
Become one with the forest. The forest is aware of the enemy's noise.
We got Code Talker's research materials back in one piece. The medical team has them under lock and key in the quarantine facility. The materials should help their research into the vocal cord parasites. Cypher won't be getting their hands on them now.
About the pathogen spreading through Mother Base. You've seen everything we've got on the outbreak. What's your opinion?
Textbook symptoms of vocal cord parasite infestation. And judging from this casualty list, it is the Kikongo strain, meaning a breed of parasite that triggers symptoms upon detecting pronunciation specific to Kikongo.
So our Kikongo-speaking staff are at risk.
Quite so.
He's right. All the victims do speak Kikongo.
So they can survive if they just use another language.
There is no guarantee. You're only dealing with the Kikongo strain. Other language strains may be present. You well know he was teaching them languages from all over the world.
The Devil's House. Nzoya Badia Bulu.
There is no way to know how many strains he has at his disposal.
So how do we keep them from becoming symptomatic? You mentioned using microbes.
Use this. A type of Wolbachia. Introduced to a sample of the parasite.
Wolbachia?
A parasitic bacteria that colonizes the parasites, turning male to female and preventing copulation. You must cultivate more. What have you done with the infected bodies?
Cremated to stop the spread of infection, but we did keep a few for study.
Good. Take this sample, grind it to a pulp, and introduce it to the larvae now nesting in the dead. The Wolbachia will multiply rapidly within those larvae
They're soldiers, not some petri dish.
Conventional cultivation methods will take too long. Extract the Volbachia from those larvae and vaccinate your men. Kikongo speakers first. This is the fastest, surest way. No one is to speak a word of Kikongo until the Volbachia are safely inside them. I will instruct your medical staff in detail on site. You have the appropriate facilities.
Yes, but
Do not worry. I made a pact with your Bete Holone on the honor of the Dene. I speak no lies.
keep an eye on him.
Will do. Follow me. I'll take you to the medical team.
Now, we must wait for the Volbachia to multiply in the larvae.
How is the disease transmitted? If it's carried by insects or rodents, then...
There is no intermediate host.
So...
The vocal cord parasites lay their eggs in the larynx of the host. Most hatch and migrate to the lungs, but some are transported to the mouth through ciliary movement, mixing in with saliva.
Saliva. Droplet transmission.
Sneezing, coughing. Any food or water containing infected saliva. It would spread fast.
Indeed. And when the larvae migrate to the lungs, symptoms can resemble the early stages of a cold, making it easy to infect others.
Meaning a simple conversation would be enough to pass it on.
All right, so what happens after the larvae migrate to the lungs?
It is as I said before. They mature by feeding on alveolar tissue. It is only then that noticeable symptoms appear in the host.
And by that point, it's too late. He's infected everyone else. It's one hell of a weapon you've created.
That is what Blag Ana wanted. Something that would spread easily. In truth, he's not the reason. But we will discuss that another time.
The Wolbachia have multiplied. We're preparing to extract them and begin vaccinating. But is this really the only way? Sure, it'll prevent infection, but the cost?
You would rather remove their vocal cords?
No. Tactical communication's a linchpin of what we do.
What if we were to ban the use of Kikongo?
Insufficient. First, there's no guarantee that only the Kikongo strain is here. Second, there is the matter of how the parasites lay their eggs. Before they can copulate, they must be exposed to the pronunciation of a specific language for a period of time, like a container filling with water. But the duration between when the container is full and when the copulation actually begins varies from case to case. In other words, even if the infected stop speaking as a countermeasure, it may already be too late. The only true solution is to prevent copulation through the Wolbachia, or by physically removing the affected tissue.
Do any antiparasitics work?
It sounds as though you have already tried.
Yeah. We tried every one there is, and nothing.
I have yet to find a medicine that can remove the parasites. At best, it temporarily covers their ears.
Why is that?
Because the parasites are companions to us. To remove them inevitably harms the host.
Companions?
More than you think. And this is why the human immune system cannot eliminate them.
We've inoculated the staff with Wolbachia to keep them from becoming symptomatic.
That should also contain the infection.
How did this happen in the first place?
It has to have been a Cypher spy within our ranks.
If this is so, then why the Kikongo strain? if their intent was to wipe you out.
Skullface said the remaining English parasite was close to the boss. If this latest strain was his doing, he wouldn't have tipped his hand.
It is possible someone brought eggs onto the base without knowing. Stuck to their shoes, clothing.
Well, that makes the most sense to me.
And where did the eggs come from?
You mentioned that your boss visited Nzoya Badiopulu.
Sure, but his gear's disinfected immediately upon return.
Then he was not the carrier.
And not just the boss. All staff dispatched to high-risk regions were quarantined on the flight back. When the symptoms first appeared, we checked and disinfected all equipment used up to that point. Any and all prisoners, soldiers, materials, and animals extracted during missions were also quarantined.
So, that just leaves...
I have seen children around here. Where are they from?
All over. Some were being held hostage at a mine. Then there were the troublemakers at Bwala Yamasa.
Bwala Yamasa?
Yeah.
Their clothes, their things. Did you burn them?
They're just kids. We couldn't. And besides, not one of them's shown symptoms.
The parasites don't infect prepubescent hosts. Their vocal cords are not fully developed.
Well, if infection doesn't occur in children...
It is possible they carried eggs on their clothes, and the infection spread from them.
Check the kid's stuff.
I doubt there is any trace left by now.
But if there is, some of those kids must be close to hitting puberty. How could we have missed this?
The name Bwala Yamasa got quite a reaction from you. I'm guessing the Kakongo strain was released in that village.
Cypher used that region to experiment with vocal cord parasite transmission. The Kakongo strain. The settlements around the refinery upstream of Bwala Yamasa were the proving grounds. They would infect one villager, then record transmission speed. Dangerous work. If they failed to contain the infection, it would slip into the surrounding regions.
At which point the world found out about the parasites, making them useless as a weapon. Incredible they'd risk such a thing.
The test site was densely populated too. A terrible place for such experiments. No doubt, they thought burning everything would wipe away all traces. The settlements were covered in oil anyway. Who would wonder if one day they caught fire? And so it did. They burned it all. Living and dead.
Those remains.
But they miscalculated. Transmission speed was far faster than anticipated. It may have been the temperature, or hygiene standards, or perhaps the parasites reacted quickly to Kikongo. Whatever the reason, nearly all villages were swiftly infected, and the settlements reduced to mounds of corpses. Making matters worse, the dry season was ending. When it came time to burn the village, the Moneni River had swelled. Many of the bodies were waterlogged.
Meaning they didn't burn completely.
The corpses still contained viable eggs, and the larvae washed downstream. And when the people downstream drank that water,
That marked the end for Bwala Yamasa.
I learned all of this at the mansion. I warned him of the risk of eggs getting out.
And?
We are prepared for any eventuality.
I get it. Putting the oil field back online. The oil leaks, saner. They plan to pollute the river. Prevent the spread of infection.
But the oil flow was stopped. And downstream, the people of Masa Village started using the water again. The PF soldiers deployed at the village were locals, spoke Kikongo. They were infected, and the kids survived.
I've heard enough.
And who stopped the flow of oil?
Don't.
We did.
That confirms it. The source of the Kikongo strain infection was Masa Village. And the children brought it here. It is no one's fault. There is no blame to be cast.
The parasites, they were tested in other regions?
Their physiology requires that they be tested under varied conditions. Another test site was in Afghanistan.
So it was the parasites there.
Both the Pashto and Tajik languages are spoken in the mountains of Afghanistan, and population density is low. Ideal testing grounds for how accurately the parasites target only the specified language. It is also relatively easy to prevent the spread of infection.
And the results?
The first test, I am told, was a success. Once the Pashtun Mujahideen were infected with the Pashto strain, they were all but wiped out.
The Hamid fighters at Smasei Fort.
It was doubly successful. No Tajik Mujahideen or Soviet soldiers became symptomatic.
So the parasites proved to be effective. What about the second test?
Also supposedly a success. A Pashtun village was the target. However, the original aim was to obtain samples of the infected. In this, they failed.
And the village?
The Soviets enacted a standard scorched earth operation.
That must have been the village where Malak lived, before being held captive at La Marjate Palace.
Having had more time to think on it, the details shared with me may have been false. They are madmen who would do anything to cover up the truth.
They certainly seem to like tossing their problems in the fire.
As a boy, Skullface's life went up in flames. Perhaps that is what fuels his fixation with fire.
Your Wolbachia stopped the infection all right, but I still don't get it. How can a few bacteria change males to females? I know they're only bugs, but...
It is not such a rare thing in the natural world. Many insects and nematodes are infected with Wolbachia.
But why?
They nest in the cell cytoplasm of the host, even in the egg cells, with the result that the offspring are born infected.
Mother-to-child transmission.
However, Wolbachia cannot nest in sperm because they do not have cytoplasm. So even a successful infection of a male ends after a single generation. This means the Wolbachia must resort to maximizing the population of infected females.
Sounds like an ethnic cleansing campaign on a tiny scale.
Gender change from male to female is their survival tactic.
So more females means more Wolbachia carriers, so it can keep thriving in the following generations.
But the parasites in a human host are supposed to be a mating pair. If there's no male, there'll be no offspring at all. It's killing itself.
Slow down. This tactic is intended for environments where a single male can copulate with multiple females. Originally, the Wolbachia did not infect the vocal cord parasites. I created a mutated strain, modifying the Wolbachia so that it could infect monogamous pairs. The Wolbachia's greatest multiplying tactic, the male-to-female change, worked against itself in the monogamous parasites. Just as you said. Then, I performed repeated selection of Wolbachia strains until I achieved 100% certainty of male-to-female conversion.
Creating female-female pairs, unable to reproduce.
And you say the Wolbachia affects the host of the host, that is, us, cutting off our means to reproduce?
It is almost certain. Of course, we will not turn female. After all, Mammals possess no natural gender-changing function. But some Wolbachia strains can cause cytoplasmic incompatibility in the host.
Is that some cell deformity?
Put simply, it means the altered sperm of infected males kill the female's egg on contact.
And that's happened to us?
Yes. And yet, what occurs in humans is not just simple CI. To date, there are no cases of Wolbachia affecting humans. The fact that this strain causes this effect, is it the vocal cord parasite's affinity with humans? I do not know enough to say for sure.
So the parasite warps the host. Reminds me of what Skullface said.
It is the way of all organisms to create their own optimal environment. Just look at you and this base. Organisms that cannot do this are doomed to extinction. The difference with parasites is that their environment is another organism. That creates a connection between life and life. Parasitism, symbiosis, or death. In this way, the host too is challenged to adapt.
Code Talker, what are the metallic archaea?
Volcanic craters spewing sulfur. Water hot enough to boil your skin off. Ocean depths of 800 plus atmospheres. Wastelands radioactive enough to kill you where you stand. There are groups of organisms that survive despite. No. Because of living in such environments.
I've heard about them. Extremo something.
Extremophiles. By selecting certain species, then subculturing and repeatedly modifying them, I created a metallic offspring of pure archaea. They subsist on metals rather than organic matter.
And some of them even consume uranium?
Yes. Uranium enrichment archaea metabolize only uranium-235. As a result, they produce weapons-grade enriched uranium.
How is that possible?
Consider how plants fractionate carbon isotopes when they conduct photosynthesis. Nature possesses abilities beyond our imagination.
So it was archaea that brought down your chopper?
Corrosive archaea, yes. They oxidize metals, feeding off the energy in the electrons they receive. What became of the wreckage?
We had the R&D team retrieve samples for study in airtight plastic containers, of course.
Prudent. We shall extract archaea from it in good time. They should help you fight back against Black Anna.
Any chance we could start now? It doesn't have to be a lot. I might just have another use for them.
If it's only a small amount you need.
That's fine. I'll get the R&D team to assist. Let's go.
South Africa was previously suspected of developing nuclear weapons. It already had a conspicuous presence at the UN because of apartheid and its armed expansionism. But when neighboring Angola and Mozambique became socialist countries in '74, South Africa felt hounded into a corner. So it accelerated its nuclear program to protect itself. 3 years later, the Soviets discovered a test facility, and 2 years after that, an American satellite observed a flash in the southern Indian Ocean. It said this was South Africa conducting a nuclear test with the help of a certain ally. Skullface used the situation in South Africa to get this ally to lend a hand. They both wanted nukes, so it was a mutually beneficial relationship. On the surface, anyway.
I figure South Africa started getting serious about nuclear weapons production in '75. In '74, the government was still able to get by with bluffing that it had a nuclear arsenal. But the year after, Word spread that an independent armed group in the Caribbean was crushed by Cypher for possessing a WMD. That's right, boss. What happened to you and your men was the reason South Africa decided to push ahead with nuclear development. A force independent of any country getting its hands on a nuke. That was a threat to the existence of countries everywhere. It wasn't just South Africa. Your presence pushed a lot of countries to get nukes. The world was scared of you. You were a threat to more than just the Cold War. If nations are gears in a machine, you had the power to smash them loose and watch the whole world grind to a halt.
Emmerich didn't go with depleted uranium for Sahelanthropus' armor because of its strength.
He had nukes in mind.
Exactly. It's meant to use its body as the fuel component for a nuclear weapon. Sahelanthropus uses built-in uranium enrichment archaea to melt its own body and extract uranium-235 from the depleted uranium in its armor. Those archaea perform the enrichment in an extremely short time. The concentration jumps by a factor of several hundred, from 0.2% to over 90%. The end result being highly enriched weapons-grade uranium. Sahelanthropus' body itself becomes a nuclear bomb. Emmerich says if it were to self-destruct, the nuclear yield would be somewhere in the region of 15 kilotons. Since you need about 50 kilograms of highly enriched uranium to trigger a nuclear reaction, that would mean Sahelanthropus contains something like 23 tons of depleted uranium.
That's not very much.
No, it isn't. That's about what you'd expect to find in a main battle tank's armor. The point is, it can be transported anywhere, even use its conventional weaponry on the battlefield, and the international community will never suspect a thing. I just received word from the R&D team and the transport team out of Afghanistan. They finished installing Sahelanthropus on the base. It's ours now.
All right. Don't let any of the staff touch that thing. Especially Emmerich.
Of course. That guy's crush on Sahelanthropus is beyond a joke. Guess he really wants to see his tech stand on its own two legs this time.
That's not gonna happen.
I know it. So you've got no plans to make it operational again?
Damn right.
Boss, I want to hear it straight from you.
Hear what?
What the hell do you want with that thing? The drive is busted. It's not like it has a nuke on board. Even if the metallic archaea could turn it into a nuclear weapon, all it can do is self-destruct. Sahelanthropus just isn't a weapon anymore. It'll draw unwanted attention without even being a deterrent.
I know.
The weapon's development strut sank 2 feet under that thing's weight. That's 1 year's drop in a single night. We've started on reinforcing the strut, but there's no guarantee it'll hold up if a storm hits.
I know that too.
Boss, why keep it?
It's a mark. Us Diamond Dogs, we don't have a country to call home. That means we have no past, nothing to prove that we lived. Every one of us threw it all away when we came here. Sahelanthropus is a symbol to show that the likes of us brought at least one crisis to its end.
A mark in history. So we can't just fade away.
It's of no practical use to us. But we still need it.
A symbol of what we've done. I'm glad I sounded you out on this. Snake, on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you.
I don't need gratitude. I need security. Keep Emmerich away from that thing.
Roger that.
You said that the nuke Skullface was trying to spread around the world were equipped with a failsafe. Something that could shut them down at will. His will.
Quite so. After all, he needed a guarantee that a buyer wouldn't simply turn the weapons back on him.
So how can they be stopped?
The criticality trigger. That is, The detonator is a complete black box design. Any attempt to dismantle it causes it to melt in seconds, using the corroding archaea. The design ensures that no detonation is possible unless he disengages the lock.
So he had a way to disengage it remotely.
Precisely. The client simply presses a button. At that moment, the detonator begins transmission with a surveillance satellite. The satellite reports to him how the client is trying to use the nuke. If he does not object, the lock is disengaged.
But if it's a risk to him in any way...
The detonator melts down. The same is true if detonation does not occur within a preset time after the lock is disengaged. The nuke is rendered useless.
Who the hell would buy something with strings attached like that?
The client would never know until the moment they actually tried to use it. Most likely, he would have explained the time delay as the detonators needing time to activate. And he only intended to sell to technologically primitive groups in the first place.
Let me guess. He'd claim it was defective and offer a replacement. Shadier than a used car salesman.
Skullface shakes your hand like a friend, using the other to control you like a puppet. This is how he works.
This is yellow cake that Cypher was having the PFs transport. Before we met you, the boss recovered it from a truck crossing the savannah. Are there metallic archaea inside it?
Yes, the archaea metabolize uranium-235 to subsist. They must be stored inside yellow cake, or they cannot survive.
So those biological traces we took for impurities were actually the real cargo.
Of course, they are deactivated, so they do not trigger a sudden enrichment. They are like baker's yeast. Yet, they do gradually enrich the uranium as they feed. I imagine you detected weapons-grade traces.
Yeah, we did.
And the malachite that was loaded on the truck had traces of uranium in it too. So that's the flower, huh? Skullface was gonna sell do-it-yourself nuke kits. The uranium-enriching archaea complete with a user's manual. And the ores with the uranium could be sourced by the client or provided by Cypher.
Even the trace amounts buried in common ores can be enriched to weapons-grade uranium by the metallic archaea. Proving that must have been the most important factor of the trials. That and the ability to successfully prevent detonation.
So if the amounts of uranium in the ores are low enough, they can get past any inspection. And you only need a tiny amount of the archaea to act as the yeast. No great challenge to smuggle that either. The first step towards saturating the world with nukes.
His plan. That was not my intention. My only goal in developing the metallic archaea was to save the Dene.
What made you think a tool for creating undetectable nuclear weapons would save your people?
After 70 years, the Dene reclaimed the Navajo Nation from which we were banished. We bore all the hardships of poverty. But we were proud to live off the land we called our own. But in the moment the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, everything changed.
I don't get it.
The nuclear arms race between the US and the Soviet Union began with the end of the Second World War. Suddenly, there was a massive demand for uranium. And it was our ill fortune that the ground beneath the Navajo Nation was rich with uranium ore. The Black Ana government set up mine after mine, and many of the Dene worked them, never informed of any danger. Every day, They went to work with no protection. The slag was simply piled out in the open. When rain fell, uranium traces left behind would seep out, and when the ground dried, it was blown about as dust. Land and water were contaminated, irradiated. Many of us became sick and died. That pain lives on to this day.
I had no idea.
Wanting more than anything to revive the land my forebears left to me, I was delighted upon discovering microbes that eat uranium. If they could be domesticated, I believed we could rid our land of uranium.
Were you successful?
No. The research called for funding on a colossal scale. But nobody was willing to invest with no prospect of a return.
And that's when Skullface showed up.
Correct. I can save you and your people. We share the same will. That is what he said to me. And I believed him. Plague Anna forced me to abandon my uranium cleanup work and focus on nuclear weapons. And he held all the Dene hostage. Today, the uranium mines within the reservation are finally closing down. It is simply less expensive now to source uranium overseas.
New victims, different places.
But uranium is a tactical resource. To rely on a foreign country for it is a difficult decision to make. And he was in the perfect place to influence that decision.
He could have condemned your people to the mines forever.
The contamination comes not only from uranium. The fallout from the Nevada nuclear tests also settled on our lands. As if our fortune were not already bad enough. We are also downwinders. To save the Dene, I must complete my original research.
Code Talker, haven't seen you eat a single thing since you got here. Let me guess. Photosynthesis?
Oh? What makes you say that?
Well, a long time ago, I knew someone with a similar ability.
Well, you are correct. Most of my body is covered with parasites. I supply them with water, and in return I receive sugars they produce when exposed to light.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't just my skin either. The parasites also act as my eyes. They have replaced many of my internal organs as well. It is thanks to them that I live on after over a century.
How did you obtain them anyway? Through your research?
I would like to say as much, but there is more to it than that. Let me take you back 20 years. I had hit a dead end with my parasite research. Then I was approached by a foundation. They said they had a sample of an unusual strain of parasite.
Which foundation?
Apparently, they had links to ARPA. But that is all I learned. I was somewhat ignorant of the ways of the world. Just being able to study it was enough for me.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Go on.
Half in doubt, I visited them to discover the body of an old man. Well, to be precise, his partial remains. A collection of parts, you could say. The man had died in an explosion.
An old man, you say?
His flesh had not decomposed. In fact, the tissue's cells were still metabolizing. The parasite had infected, or should I say assimilated with, the tissues, and was keeping them alive. I became obsessed with studying the body parts, forgoing food and even sleep. Every day was filled with new discoveries. The parasite's biology, internal anatomy, life cycle, but there was only so much I could learn through observation. And so I made a decision. To truly know the parasites, I had to live with them.
So, you implanted them inside you from the dead man's flesh?
Correct. It was quite a gamble, whether or not they would adapt to me. But fortunately, it appears I was compatible with them. Or perhaps, through my many years of research, my immune system learned to tolerate them.
Were they that body's only parasite?
Yes. However, there was a separate specimen that supplied its host with adrenaline in response to pain, and yet another that could control insects at will through secreting heterogeneous pheromones. I wanted exposure to them, to take them into me, but my wishes were denied. Their records, though, provided clues that helped advance my research. Would you care to join me? A life spent never worrying about food is a most wonderful one.
I think I'll pass. But thanks. This has been helpful.
The one that covers. The parasite that lives on the surface of the skull's bodies is what gives them their power. Similar to my children, who live in my skin. I modified the parasites I isolated from the body of that old man, differentiating them with various abilities. One that can blend perfectly into its surroundings by exposing the pigments in its cells at will. Another that, by harboring multiple species of metallic archaea, can oxidize and reduce metal. Isolating the one that covers and transplanting it into an artificial medium should provide the same abilities as the skulls, but they can only subsist within a human body. Once transplanted into the medium, they will eventually die. Another thing, the weakness of the one that covers is desiccation. Their surface moisture loss is greater than ours. The reason they give off mist is to alleviate this by releasing the salts inside them as microparticles. Water vapor condenses around them, appearing as mist. But this dries out the atmosphere until they cannot even produce mist. And once their supply of water from the host runs out, the parasites are in danger. They, along with their host, enter a form of suspended animation. However, a similar effect occurs if they come into contact with a large amount of water. Rain, for instance. The one that covers will temporarily abandon other processes in his eagerness to absorb the water. Pitijolone. Make the weather your ally. Skullface has finally burned out. The world is rid of his existence at last.
Was he still alive?
You could say that. But you could also say he'd been dead for decades.
What's that supposed to mean?
Biologically speaking, it's hard to say how much was his life.
Side effects from the treatment?
No, the primary effect. Keeping a dying host alive as long as possible. That is the whole point. But in the end, he grew too dependent on his children. As if he had any other way to keep on living. He first underwent parasite therapy before the Soviet Union became his home. His body was horribly burned. Fire washed across his thin young frame and stole his skin and his throat, even his lungs. Only through repeated therapies could the parasites keep him alive. Most of his life became something the parasites gave to him.
And then he lost the ability to die.
That is correct. The parasites live on past the host's death, still aiding cell composition. At that stage, there is no way to extract them from the host cells. There is no way of knowing when the last cell of Skullface's body would die. The only choice was to burn the whole thing. And his children, along with it. And I am one to talk. When my life is snuffed out, I expect you to treat my body the same way. And when I burn, I will truly be one with my children for the first time. You say there were 3 English vocal parasites.
According to Skullface, yeah.
Skullface had 2 of the English strain with him. You burned both of them.
There was an oil fire. I tossed him in.
So that just leaves 1. And you tell me Skullface said he used it.
He said it was very close to me.
Very close. One of your comrades, or someone ordered to kill you. Or he could have been speaking metaphorically.
Metaphorically?
Close to your spirit, close to your heart. Someone who either loves you or despises you.
The second one makes a long list.
Whichever it is, act with caution. Skullface implanted someone with the English language strain. Who it is irrelevant.
Why?
I tell you what Skullface really meant. Very close to you means you will be exposed. All the infected here have been given the Wolbachia. Even if the vocal cord parasites infect them now, they cannot reproduce. But if there's a different host among us, host to the English strain.
If that were the case, we'd see the symptoms.
What about the non-English speakers?
We have plenty of those, but the staff use English as a common language.
But if that someone has not spoken English yet, and begins to speak it now,
there'd be another outbreak.
The final mating pair of the English strain must be found immediately. Skullface is gone, but his threat still remains. On this base, do you see what the final mating pair is? With him dead, those parasites are the stain he wished to leave upon the world. His thirst for vengeance. In their flesh. Think. Does anyone here bear a grudge against you? Who would target you, specifically?
The ethnic cleansers that Code Talker mentioned, they weren't Skullface's true goal. All we have is circumstantial evidence, but here's my theory. It was Cypher who started developing the vocal cord parasites as bioweapons, parasitic weapons, and Africa was the testing ground for them. As Code Talker said, their purpose is the ethnic cleansing of only those who speak a particular language. So they could do a weapon of mass destruction to eradicate specific groups, races, ethnicities, or colonies by the language they speak. Or a kind of absolute language control. Or maybe a tool for those arrogant fools to build some misguided utopia. I can see plenty of uses for them. However, in practical terms, they wouldn't be as dangerous as you'd think. Counteracting the parasites is easy, after all. Cut them out of your throat to save your life, or just don't talk. That also prevents the infection from spreading. So if the international community were to find out about them, they'd no longer be the threat they were conceived to be. In which case, their targets would be limited to minority groups as a deterrent or a terrorist tool. It's hard to imagine Cypher developing something like that as a main weapon for their arsenal. That leads me to think we've only tugged on one little thread in Cypher's grand tapestry. An obscure corner of their work, possibly forgotten altogether. In any case, things changed. When Skullface was forced to relocate to Africa and he saw that thread dangling. All the time he continued that research, he was secretly following his own agenda. The ethnic liberator parasites. is English language strain. Skullface said there were only 3 samples of the English language strain parasite, and I think we can believe him. Bringing his ethnic liberator's plan to fruition depended on creating an English version of the vocal cord parasites at all costs. But an English strain would have been useless to Cypher. Worse, it could have destroyed everything they'd built. It was the one type they couldn't allow. That means Skullface was forced to develop his English strain out of sight of Cypher's network. Naturally, he couldn't use the greenhouse facility Cypher had set up and filled with guinea pigs. Skullface must have found some secret place to create his precious few English parasites, hiding all evidence like a man cheating on his wife. Somewhere, an entirely standalone environment. And when his plan entered its final phase, he must have made the place disappear. Some little room, could be anywhere, but now nowhere at all. We'll never know where he did it, but to elude Cypher's surveillance, it couldn't have been big. I believe Skullface was telling the truth. There were only ever 3 samples of the English language strain. Why activate Sahelanthropus in Afghanistan? This is how Skullface wanted things to play out. The Soviet Union secretly develops a new type of nuclear weapon and successfully deploys it in Afghanistan. Revealing the existence of Sahelanthropus results in a return to the glory days of the Cold War. The threat it poses reignites the nuclear arms race between the world's major powers. The demand for nuclear weapons increases around the globe. What if you then introduced a nuclear weapon anyone could get their hands on? Non-nuclear nations, militant groups of all shapes and sizes, they'd all jump at the chance. Sahelanthropus was a marketing tool to sell nukes all around the world. But I think it's safe to say that plan was stamped out before it got up and running. The world's intelligence agencies never did turn up anything conclusive on it. After all, Sahelanthropus vanished before word could spread. Everything that's happened is already a fading memory, never to join the pages of history. Except for Cypher. Cypher won't forget. They'll already be working on something, quietly beneath the surface. They'll use the pieces of data scraped together from this incident to build their own bipedal weapon. It'll take them a long time to complete it, but for now, the greed sector have found their new life's work. We'll have to be ready too. Hewitt's dug up some interesting facts about our skull-faced friend. 9 years ago, he was exiled to South Africa, stripped of political power. The upshot's that he ceased being a serious threat, in Cypher's eyes anyway. They eased up on surveillance, giving him an opening to establish his own military unit, one that answered to his will alone. Those men likely had no idea their orders were coming from Skullface. They probably didn't even know the organization was a part of Cypher at all. Anyway, it was in South Africa where he found renewed interest in parasites. And when he discovered the vocal cord parasites, he began to make his plan. Wipe the English language out of existence. Free the world, not by taking men's lives, but by taking their tongues. In his eyes, the greatest symbiotic parasite the world's ever known isn't microbial. It's linguistic. Words are what keeps civilization, our world, alive.
There was something Skullface said. America is made up of many peoples, but those peoples never mix. Quite so. One nation, home to hundreds of different ethnic groups, many of whom stick to their respective living areas. Little colonies, not interacting with other groups, going out of their way to avoid one another. Their land, organizations, relationships. Thus, the United States of America is no melting pot. It is more of a salad bowl. It is not made up from one people, but for its minorities to function in society, a common ground is needed. Language. Even if the country is not one, No, because it's not one. A lingua franca is necessary. English. American hegemonism was born from the illusion that English could unite diverse ethnicities. In taking in people from around the globe, America became a microcosm of it. Now the boundaries between it and the rest of the world have become blurred. However different our neighbors may be, English enables us to create symbiotic relationships with each other. If English can bring unacquainted neighbors together in America, this should hold true for the world. This salad bowl that is the world can also become one. I have spoken enough. Your men can take it from here. Will you permit me to rest? Have something to eat?
I thought you don't eat.
I can subsist without food. But there is more to the act of eating than nourishment. We receive nature's blessings, and we affirm our part in it. And in doing so, we express our gratitude.
Sorry, it's, hearing you say you don't need to eat and that you're a part of nature in the same breath. Anyway, what can we get you? Not exactly a five-star restaurant, but the kitchen's used to serving a lot of different appetites.
Hamburgers.
Hamburgers?
Even we didn't have become Americanized. I eat them often back home.
And you just can't let them go. Well, as far as symbols of the American Empire go, hamburgers are pretty good. The victory of capitalism. Your people suffered so much at the hands of America, and you ask for hamburgers.
We have suffered more than you can know. But I do not see hamburgers as an accomplice. A single dish, providing a balanced helping of nature's blessings. Meat, grain, and vegetable. How could anyone hate such a magnificent thing?
Says the guy who can survive on photosynthesis. Balance has nothing to do with it. You just like a good burger.
That is also true. Be warned, though. I have very high standards.
Don't worry. I do too. All right then. One good old-fashioned all-American icon coming up.
I look forward to it.
You mentioned that the man on fire was crushed under Sahelanthropus in its hangar.
Yeah. He was caught under the wheels of its transport platform.
But his body wasn't found.
What?
We searched the area the moment we arrived, but there was no trace of him.
I wasn't hallucinating.
I know. I trust you on that. That means someone must have taken the body. But when I got there, everything was still as it was. Even Skullface hadn't been touched. I can't see a reason to sneak into a place like that and drag out the biggest, heaviest guy there.
What are you getting at?
Only option left is, he got up and walked away.
That platform ran him over.
Just ran him over.
You're saying that's not enough?
I don't want to believe it, but maybe not. He shrugs off bullets, even rocket strikes. There's no reason to think that would finish him. It seems ridiculous, but I'll start gathering eyewitness accounts just in case.
If you dig up anything concrete, I want to know.
You'll be the first, if I dig anything up. But I hope to hell I don't.
No kidding.